Hello, this is Professor Werwath. I wanted to spend some time talking about how Boeing lost its engineering culture. Just as way of background, I did work not for Boeing, but with Boeing in my early career. I was at General Dynamics, Air Force Plant 19 as an intern working on Boeing 767 struts. So we were machining and fabricating those struts in San Diego and shipping them to the Boeing plants in Everett, Washington. Back then, the culture was one of hitting your dates, hitting your timeline, hitting your production values and numbers, and hitting the quality. Quality first and foremost, always to the exact precision needed by the Boeing company. The Boeing company had high standards, and as a subcontractor, you either meet them or you're gone. So it was a tough culture. Boeing had its own PMO sitting inside of our Air Force Plant 19 facility, uh, gleaming white office in the middle of a factory with all sorts of program managers and sourcing engineers and quality specialists running around to make sure that we at General Dynamics did our job. So let's step back for a moment. What are the 5 values of an engineering culture? This is from a recent Forbes article, 2023, Stan Klimoff. Science describes the world that is, engineering creates the world that can be. That's what all engineers know. That's what makes engineering so appealing to, I think, many of us as engineers. The engineering culture heralds from the engineering teams, but it does not stop there, right? Many great businesses started as engineering companies. Boeing, I believe, is one of them, right? And we would still describe them as being engineering led, at least at Boeing up until recently, I would have said the same thing. Engineering culture is all about rigorous analysis of the problems, employing data, being experimentally driven, approaches to arrive at practical solutions, uh, devoid of politics, devoid of opinions, devoid of mandates from above. You cannot mandate a suboptimal solution, right? Um, these values, the 5 values from the article: openness in communication, sharing of information freely without fear, without anxiety, right? Impact, actually solving problems, making things work, right? Putting hand to glove or glove to machine, and actually not just talking about it, not just debating it, and not just writing reports. This is about actually solving problems and making things happen, right? Creativity, thinking outside the box, not necessarily using cookie cutter solutions. Uh, Independence, right? And the independence of the engineer to work free and clear of impediments, free and clear of groupthink, free and clear of politics, free and clear of what managers, business people say should be done, right? But doing what needs to be done from an engineering perspective, right? Adaptation, the agile culture of adapting to the needs of the users, the needs of the market, the needs of the problem at hand. So these are the 5 values that the article talked about. We're not going to talk too much more about this, except to say that I would like to at least imply that Boeing had at one time, maybe many years ago, I believe all of these values, right? And frankly, that's what made Boeing great. Boeing has been and largely still is a great American company that has its roots from almost 100 years ago, whose culture drove them to excellence, drove them to success. I'll share with you one story, and it goes way back, about 60 years, right? The Boeing 707 was competing head to head with a British airplane called the de Havilland Comet. You can look it up and you can realize that in the early 60s, the de Havilland Comet was literally falling out of the skies and people were dying. The Comet became quickly known, even though it was a pretty advanced aircraft at the time, it became known as a death trap and people avoided it. And at the time, the 707 was the beneficiary. So in quick succession, the de Havilland Comet was taken out of the skies. It was basically grounded for safety reasons. It turned out that the windows were basically cut out with rectangular sharp edges, right? Instead of the normal oval windows that you see with Boeing. Those oval windows that Boeing implemented I was going to say pioneered, but I would just say the word implemented, right? Kept them in the air while the de Havilland Comet, through the stress cycles that normally come from pressurizing and depressurizing a jet aircraft, right? The de Havilland Comet eventually had stress fractures that were depressurizing, rapidly depressurizing planes in the sky, and they were falling out. So Boeing, with its oval design, which is the proper way to do it from an engineering perspective, survived, and de Havilland Comet and the de Havilland Company went out of business. So it was pretty tragic back then, but Boeing prevailed, and Boeing has been arguably largely prevailing ever since, with a lot of bumps in the road, right? Historical significance, right? Boeing has deep roots in innovation and excellence. The company established a legacy of pioneering aircraft design, setting industry standards for safety and performance. Boeing's engineers were known for unparalleled technical skills and commitment to quality. And you're going to hear that word time and time and time again. It's all about quality. Every step in the process, every manufacturing item or defect is tracked and monitored and fixed, right? They upheld a tradition of pushing boundaries and delivering cutting edge solutions. Boeing fostered a culture of collaboration and teamwork amongst engineers, encouraging creativity and mutual support in solving complex challenges. However, and it wasn't that long ago, I think you could say that it started perhaps with the Boeing 767, but there was a shift in priorities, right? Kind of part of this came from the merger with McDonnell Douglas. So McDonnell Douglas brings with it its own culture, and its culture was much more financially driven as opposed to engineering driven, right? So the corporate strategy changes, right? Changes in leadership, organizational strategies, prompting a shift in priorities, focusing on short-term gains, shareholder value over engineering prowess, right? Boeing's shift away from its engineering roots began with a strategic refocus towards cost cutting and efficiency, steering away from technical excellence, right? Increasing competition and market demands pressured Boeing to prioritize quick profits over long-term engineering investments, altering the company's core values. So, even though it was clear that Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas, in many ways, the leadership from McDonnell Douglas, in some ways, kind of bought Boeing in terms of they wound up influencing the Boeing culture more than the other way around. So many of the aircraft that survived the merger were from the Boeing side. The DC-XX was summarily canceled as a commercial aircraft. But that doesn't mean that the people went away or the facilities went away or the culture went away. So McDonnell Douglas's culture permeated Boeing, and this is, easily, I want to say more than 25, 30 years ago. And arguably it's changed ever since, right? It's been a shift. Management decisions, right? Cost-cutting measures, decisions to outsource engineering functions, reduce R&D budgets, prioritize production efficiency, had a detrimental effect on the culture, right? Management choices to overlook safety concerns, prioritize timelines over quality, veer towards a reactive rather than proactive approach, eroding the engineering ethos at Boeing. And you can see that day to day, hour by hour on the production line. What is focused? What is emphasized? Is it a focus on quality? Is it a focus on the customer? Is it a focus on engineering specifications? Or is it a focus on get it out the door, right? Incentive structures, right? Implementation of incentive systems that, again, rewarded short-term financial gains and cost-saving initiatives, incentivize behaviors inconsistent with a robust engineering culture, right? Boeing's financial challenges drove a shift towards profit maximization, leading to compromises in engineering standards. The relentless pursuit of short-term financial targets shifted or stifled innovation and constrained resources for research and development and hindered technological advancements, right? The pressure to satisfy stockholders for quick returns sidelined long-term investment in engineering capabilities. What do we see here? The first slide was the 737 MAX, right? What is the problem with the 737 MAX? That's probably one of the first case studies here. Tragic failures, planes falling out of the sky. At its core, the decision was made to modify the 737, which is an ancient platform, 3 or 4 decades old, Modify that rather than redesign a new plane from scratch. Well, the problem here is that the efficiencies needed for the long distances that this plane was going to be flying required engines that were so big that it actually compromised the geometry of the plane, right? It was 737 has always been known as a very low to the ground airplane. The engines being so low, you literally couldn't properly land the plane. So what did they do? Right. Well, they made sure that, the engines being so large, it was actually forcing the plane kind of a nose down scenario. That was the natural kind of tendency, aerodynamic tendency of the planes was to be nose down. The engineers decided to create some software that they didn't tell the FAA about, and they didn't tell the pilots about, or the unions, right? And that software was going to push the nose up under certain scenarios, right? And override the controls from the pilot, which not only was concerning to the pilots, in some cases it was fatal to the flights. So MCAS software was blamed, right? But the MCAS software was the solution to the nose down problem to begin with. So fundamentally, the decision to not design a new aircraft from the bottom up, the decision to reuse the 737 ancient platform with not enough modifications to accommodate the larger engines. All of this was short-term focused, get the product out the door, save the money, save the time, save the engineering effort, right? All turned out to be tragically taken. 787 had problems with the battery systems. The battery systems were catching fire. These were lithium-ion batteries, right? These were outsourced. Much of the 787 and even much of the 767 were outsourced to third parties. Now, you cannot outsource your brand name. You cannot outsource the airplane itself. The airplane itself is Boeing. It's all about Boeing. And when the battery system doesn't work, the Boeing engineers had to kick into high gear, and contain the problems with the lithium-ion batteries, because the lithium-ion batteries were basically supplying a supplemental source of energy on board the aircraft, and it was integral to the operation of that plane. They never fixed the root cause per se, but they were able to contain any problems with the batteries through special containment mechanisms on board the aircraft, right? 787 production problems, again, came from outsourcing, right? Why were they outsourcing so much? To reduce the need or requirement for union labor, which reduces the costs of production. It also outsources some of the risks. So what 767 and 787 in particular did was require that the suppliers invest in the tooling, which reduced the asset base of Boeing, right? So the tooling, even though it belonged to Boeing, right, it was funded. That portion of the R&D was funded by the suppliers. So to be a supplier in a Boeing program required you to have deep pockets and to amortize the cost of that tooling over the production life of the program. So how did that factor in? Well, frankly, you're outsourcing your designs, you're outsourcing the production, you're outsourcing the risk. And at some point, it comes back to haunt you, right? And certainly these production problems were all part and parcel of basically Boeing being too far removed from where the actual action was taking place, right? Including the fuselage. Fuselages were also outsourced to a company that was a spin-off from Boeing. Again, another short-term fix, right? Spin off the liability and the costs and the risks that go with building fuselages. So how do you turn this around? How do you rebuild a culture that's broken? And I'm not saying it's fatal, but I am saying that there's some brokenness there that needs to be turned around. It's pretty obvious. Every article you read has referred to this, right? New leadership committed to reinstating engineering values. In my mind, you should put an engineering charge, but foster a culture of innovation, prioritizing safety and excellence over short-term gains. Make the investments, make the tough decisions. Decide to invest in your capabilities, your capacities, your skills, the leading edges of technology, and make that clear that this is where Boeing is going in the future. We're no longer here to just consistently cost cut, because that is very demoralizing for engineers, but it also eventually shows up in the product itself. You whittle away at the costs, and eventually you're getting to the actual functionality of the product. To restructure the organization to realign it with companies' focus on engineering, invest in talent development, and renew collaboration among teams. Make sure that those teams can collaborate, and a culture of openness is reinstated back into the company, right? And then ethics. Make sure that you have a strong ethical framework that emphasizes integrity, transparency, and accountability to rebuild trust with customers, regulators, employees, and yes, suppliers as well. Because I think the suppliers are the key here. The suppliers, if they don't trust Boeing, if Boeing doesn't trust them, it's all only going to be catastrophic. And with that, I will leave it to you guys to discuss further in more detail what I missed, what I got right, what I got wrong. Okay, take care.